My name is Gwen Sorley, and this is a special webinar for our educators who are interested in chatting about uncovering and addressing executive function struggles in students. We will talk about executive function, what executive function is, what negatively affects executive function, how to identify your students who may be struggling with executive function, and how play attention can help. Now, I have a very similar background to all of you here today. My background is in education. I have a master's in education, and I started using play attention back in 1996. So about 25 years ago, when I was teaching in a public school setting. I was a second and third grade classroom teacher, and we incorporated play attention into our school setting back in the 90s, really. And so I've had a lot of experience over the past 25 years helping schools just like yours set up successful play attention programs. So I do hope that my experiences using play attention with lots of different individuals will give you a better understanding of how play attention works and how it can help your students thrive and succeed. Now, as educators, we're always wondering, what is our goal, right? We're always questioning, what is our goal in education? And I know that the big goal is to prepare our students for adulthood, right? We want to impart knowledge and skills to all of our students and make certain that they are prepared for the real world. We want them to be able to think deeply. We want to have enough knowledge where they can go out and solve real world challenges and come up with meaningful solutions. However, these goals can seem really challenging when we have students who are seemingly struggling with just the day-to-day, right? How many times have you thought to yourself, this student is so bright, but he's struggling in school. He's struggling in my classroom simply because he can't follow through with multiple step instructions. He never turns in his assignments. When I give a test, he spends half the time daydreaming and doesn't finish the test. Or I give him a classroom assignment and he just rushes through it. And because he rushes through it, even though he knows the material, he's making careless errors. I'm certain many of you go through this on a day-to-day basis. So the individual is very bright, you know the potential is there. However, the struggles are there. The school struggles are there because of weak executive function. Now, remember, executive function are a set of mental processes that help us get things done, right? These mental processes include attention, organization, emotion regulation, impulse control, mental flexibility, task initiation, and self-monitoring. Just think and reflect on how important all of these processes are when this student is in your classroom. They're critical to school success. And you know this as an educator, you naturally know that they have to have this set of mental processes in place in order to be successful. However, there have been many studies now that support this as well. There was one study done at the University of Pennsylvania, and they looked at kindergarten students, and they found that kindergartners who experience deficits in executive function are much more likely to face academic difficulties in elementary school. In math alone, their odds of struggling by third grade are increased fivefold. That's incredible. That is very significant when you look at that. Now, not only did we have studies that look at kindergartners, but there's also an interesting study that was done in the UK. They looked at 3,000 school-age children, and what they found was that weak working memory. And remember, working memory is a critical process of executive function. weak working memory was more indicative of struggles in school than IQ. So that means individuals who may have a very high IQ, but poor working memory were consistently performing lower than their peers on math exams and reading comprehension. So that is really important to keep in mind as well. So it is essential that we understand and identify those students who are struggling with executive function. No one is born with strong executive function. However, we all have the potential to develop strong executive function. Executive function starts developing right after birth, and it continues through our mid to late 20s. Now, many times, though, we do expect individuals to develop strong executive function by the time they reach middle school. But if they're struggling, oftentimes they're just identified as lazy, forgetful, unmotivated, or oppositional. So it's important that we are able to identify those students who are struggling with weak executive function. So let's look at some examples of this. If we break down the different processes that we were talking about earlier in executive function, one, of course, is impulse control. That ability to impulse control is the ability to stop, think, and then act, right? So an indicator that some of your students may be having a hard time with impulse control, that piece of executive function, your student has a hard time taking turns, right? They forget to raise their hand and they just blurt out answers. Or you notice that they're constantly rushing through their work. And because they're rushing through their work just to get it done, they tend to make careless errors. So those are all indications that your student is struggling with impulse control. Emotion regulation. This is huge. So this is for your students where something relatively small may happen with another peer or during the classwork, and you think it's a small situation, and they have this very big response, this very big emotional response where they have a hard time reining in their emotions. So they're often overreacting, or they have difficulties with criticism or making mistakes. That's all about emotion regulation. Flexible thinking, that's that mental flexibility. So you're going to see this in your students who have a really hard time transitioning from one situation to another. So all of you who are here that are working with middle schoolers, right? This can be very difficult because this is usually the first year when they start middle school. It's the first year they really have to change classes and transition from one classroom to another. And even in elementary school, it can be when you just are transitioning from seat work to the lunchroom, or it can be when you're just transitioning from an activity that they're involved in and moving on to the next subject matter. And they have a really hard time with that. Working memory. Remember, we talked about just a little bit ago how individuals with weak working memory truly struggle with school success. So remember, working memory is the ability to take in information, hold that information in your mental workspace, manipulate that information, and then give a response or complete a task. So it has a big impact on reading comprehension and higher mathematical word problems. We just did a webinar on working memory and just released an ebook as well on that subject. If you missed the working memory webinar and would like to receive a copy of that, please just type in the chat box working memory, and we'll make certain that you get both the link for the webinar recording and also the ebook, just in case you missed that. Just type in working memory and we'll make certain we get that to you. So individuals with working memory will be having a difficult time following through with multiple step instructions, and they'll have a hard time with reasoning, evaluating, comprehension. Self-monitoring. So self-monitoring is their ability to review their own work and really understand how their behaviors affect others. So individuals who have a hard time in the area of self-monitoring, they're not reviewing their work before they turn it in. Or you may notice that in the reading process. I used to see this a lot with my students. They're not self-monitoring, so they may be reading aloud to you and they say a word incorrectly or read the word as a different word, and it doesn't make sense, but they're not self-monitoring and making certain that what they're saying actually makes sense. And so that really slows down the reading process and makes reading comprehension difficult. So those are your individuals who aren't checking themselves, or the fact that they don't understand how certain behaviors they do affect others in the classroom. Planning and prioritization, of course, individuals struggling in these areas, they don't know what parts of the project are most important. They have a really hard time starting because they have difficulty prioritizing. And that goes back to task initiation, right? That student who classically is always procrastinating and must be redirected several times before they'll even start a task. And it can be a task that's very easy for them, but they just don't seem to be able to get started. And organization. Organization, you know, so many of your students, especially as you get into those higher levels, into middle school and high school, where we're expecting them to be much more independent and much more organized. These individuals, when they have difficulty with organization, it can affect their train of thought as well as their individual workspace. So it's important that we can actually pinpoint the different areas that are weakest for individuals. And like I said, sometimes it's hard to really identify these individuals because sometimes they're just quickly labeled as lazy or obstinate, or just simply disorganized. But we do need to take some time to assess those individuals who are having a hard time with the day-to-day, with those set of mental processes that help them get things done. Now, I'm certain that most of you in your schools do have assessments that you use. A couple that we use at Play Attention, one is the brief. And I really like the brief. If you haven't looked at it in the past, it's the behavior rating intake of executive function. And it's an online survey. There is a pen and paper version as well, but you can do it online. And it's an assessment that teachers can take or complete, or parents can complete. Even if you have a student who is 13 years old or older, they can do a self-assessment. It asks a variety of questions, and at the end, you get a very comprehensive view of that individual's executive function on a day-to-day basis. That's one we use, and that's, of course, a subjective assessment because it gives us a good and because it is influenced by experience and observation. We use another assessment at Play Attention called Focus. Now, Focus is a norm reference test of attentional control, and it is computer-based. It takes 20 minutes, and at the end of the 20 minutes, we receive a full report that tells us how that individual compared to the performance of his or her peers. And we look at 4 areas of attentional control. We look at consistency, performance, impulse control, and their ability to deal with distractions, both auditory and visual. So that is a more objective assessment because it's not influenced by experience or observation. It is a computer-based assessment that your students will take. If you want a little bit more guidance in the area of assessments and learn more about the assessments we use, the brief is the one that you would actually go through that company to look at the brief. The focus assessment, I can help you with that because you can go through us for the focus assessment. So if you have additional questions about assessments, please do type in assessments and we'll make certain that we'll get that information to you as well. Because it's critical that when we're making a plan of action, right, we need to know the individual's strengths and weaknesses, the severity of those weaknesses, so that we can make a better overall plan. Now, executive function, that development, remember we talked about how the development of executive function starts right after birth and continues on through your mid to late 20s. But there are many factors that can inhibit the development of executive function. And as I was mentioning earlier, we expect all of our students to have strong executive function by the time they hit middle school. However, we never really, most of us, at least I know before I had play attention in my school, I wasn't really addressing those foundational skills they needed in order to have strong executive function. A lot of us just assume that it's going to develop naturally. But there are several factors that can affect the development of executive function. And those include ADHD, stress, anxiety, and adverse experiences. Did you know that by 2020, 5.6 million kids, that's 9.2% of our children population, had been diagnosed with anxiety? And of course, when there's ADHD or anxiety or stress, they have a difficult time with their attention, their memory, their impulse control, all of those foundational skills that they need in order to even develop strong executive function. So you may wonder, but I've always had students in my classroom who were ADHD or diagnosed with anxiety or were stressed or had adverse experience. Why now? Why does it seem that we are now having more and more students in the classroom who are struggling with executive function? And you probably are very well versed in the answer by now. COVID really had a negative effect on the development of executive function, not only for our children, but it also affected us as adults. Our executive function has been severely affected by COVID. Learning loss due to COVID. I found this really interesting. This was a quote from Thomas Kane, who's at the Center of Education for Harvard. And he stated that even students who spent the least amount of learning remotely during 2020 and 2021 school years, just a month or less. So they were only on distance learning for a month or less. Those are the individuals that had the least amount of e-learning. They missed an equivalent of 7 to 10 weeks of math learning. That's really significant. That's what they found with students with the least amount of e-learning, right? Think about all of your students who had a year or more. Now, I just had a comment from Brenda. Brenda says there has been executive functions long before COVID. Absolutely, Brenda. And like I said, executive function difficulties have always been there. However, why is it seeming so prevalent right now? And that is primarily due to COVID. Now, not only was there learning loss, but think about those individuals who actually had COVID, right? If they had COVID, then those individuals are reporting COVID brain fog, what we now know of as COVID brain fog. And brain fog is that slow or sluggish thinking. This form of brain fog can affect different aspects of cognition. So there have been many studies that are showing that individuals who had COVID, and they could have been individuals who were hospitalized or not hospitalized, had severe bouts of COVID, or even had mild cases, are experiencing difficulties with working memory, attention, and executive function as a whole. There have also been several studies that show that due to isolation and a loss of sleep, because many of our students, of course, they were somewhat socially isolated, and many of our students had difficulties with sleep during that time. And due to the isolation and loss of sleep, researchers have cited a worsening of emotional health and behavioral health among children and adolescents. So all of these factors have deeply affected our students' development of executive function. Not only are they showing that the loss of sleep and that social isolation has it affected the behavioral health and the emotional health, but it also has negative consequences on attention and cognitive functioning. So there are a variety of possible contributing factors when it comes to weak executive function. And probably for most of your students, it's a combination, right? Most of your students who have ADHD have also probably been diagnosed with anxiety. And of course, they also experienced some learning loss and some social isolation and perhaps a loss of sleep difficulties. So there are a variety of factors when it comes to this. However, what we know, the good news, right? And as educators, this is why we're educators, because we know through neuroplasticity that the brain is moldable, it's shapeable. And if we provide our students with the right challenge, the right tools, and the right feedback, they can develop these skills despite their current wiring. We know that age is not a factor. And they also know that labels like ADHD or anxiety are not a factor. If we provide our students with the right challenge, they can create these new neural networks that are necessary for strong executive function. So one of our first steps to help our students typically is to do a 504, right? And maybe you're not even really developing a specific 504 for a student who's struggling, but you may make certain accommodations. But I bet many of you think, as I did as an educator, why is the 504 not working? You know, I put all of these accommodations in place. Why isn't it seeming to get that end result that I was looking for, right? And remember, my end result is preparing them for adulthood. Let's look at some of the examples of accommodations. And I know that you're all familiar with these because you're using them in a day-to-day situation. But these are some very common accommodations that we put in place. So we give preferential seating, we provide a to-do checklist, we give them extended time on tests and assignments, excused lateness, we simplify complex directions, we permit them to resubmit assignments, we increase the novelty of what we're teaching, and we provide behavioral management support. So we might have a behavior management system in place. We do all of these things, and yet it seems that they're still not really thriving and succeeding. Remember, we can put these accommodations in place, and I think they're important. However, our end goal in education is to prepare our students for the real world. We have to develop knowledge and skills that they will use in adulthood. And once they leave school, accommodations are not going to be put into place for them. I think accommodations are important, but it's important that we integrate or combine, I should say, combine those accommodations with specific skill building. We have to get to the root cause and develop those cognitive skills that are weakest for that individual so that the accommodations are actually beneficial. And so that we're also preparing them for adulthood when those real life challenges kick in and those accommodations are no longer available to them. So look at preferential seating, right? You and I both know that you can give a student, let's say a student with ADHD, seating in the front of the class, closest to you, away from other students. And yet, even though you moved their physical location, that student will still find something to distract them, won't they? And so it's not enough just to physically move their location. We also have to teach them how to filter distractions. Yes, moving them is somewhat helpful, but in the end, we have to be teaching them how to filter distractions because that's the root cause. That's what's making things so difficult for them. We provide a to-do checklist. However, it seems that they keep coming in every morning and forget that they have that checklist or forget to keep up with that checklist. So we have to strengthen short-term memory. We have to strengthen their working memory and their ability to pay attention. That will make the checklist more effective and prepare them for the real world challenges. We also give them extended time for tests and assignments. But how many of you here think, well, we gave him extended test time, but his main difficulty is sustaining attention. So even though we gave him extended test time, it just gave him a longer time to daydream, right? So giving extended test time is good. However, we have to get to the root cause and we have to teach that individual how to sustain their attention, how to start an assignment right away, keep their attention just on that assignment until completion. Closed-end tasking. Now, we also simplify complex directions. So in addition to that, instead of saying, put away your pencil, get out your notebook, turn to page 46, we say, put away your pencil. Or we ask them, what did I just say? So in addition to making those accommodations, we want to teach attention, auditory processing, that ability to follow through with multiple step instructions. We want to teach them impulse control so that when you are giving multiple step instructions, they're listening to the entire set of instructions instead of just hearing that first thing and acting on it, right? That's what a lot of them are doing. And so we need to teach all of that in order to help them learn how to follow through with multiple step complex instructions. We need to teach and strengthen attention, auditory processing, impulse control, and improve their processing speed. We oftentimes permit them to resubmit assignments. And the reason we do that is typically because of those careless errors they make. And so therefore, we have to teach impulse control, strengthen their ability to slow down, read the information, and give thoughtful answers. We also provide behavior management support, but we want to teach them not just, give them checklists and stars if they're, doing well behaviorally. We want to teach them how those behaviors affect themselves and others in the classroom. And more importantly, that they can control these behaviors. So it's important to have these accommodations in place, but our goal as educators is to get to the root cause and develop these core cognitive skills that are required for strong executive function. That's what we have to do as educators, is actually start developing these cognitive skills. And that's what play attention can do for your school. Play attention can teach the cognitive skills that are required for strong executive function. Now, some of you here are current clients, so I know that you are currently using play attention in your school. And some of you are just now taking a look at play attention and how it can benefit your students. So let me explain first that play attention utilizes body wave technology. So this is NASA-inspired body wave technology. It's a specially designed armband, and on the back, there are 3 sensors. So that armband simply rests on their arm, and that armband those sensors monitor your students' brain activity that tells us how attentive they are. And then that information is given over to the computer, where they're allowed to control all of the cognitive exercises just with their mind, or more specifically, their attention alone. And they receive constant and immediate feedback as to whether or not they truly are focused and paying attention. And then we integrate that feedback technology with specific cognitive skill training and behavior shaping. And as I mentioned earlier, we've been doing this integrative approach of feedback technology with cognitive skill training and behavior shaping for about 30 years. But Tufts University School of Medicine wanted to know, is that integration that play attention does, is it important? Or can we just give our students a series of cognitive exercises and get the same results? So they went into the Boston Public School District, and they had 3 different groups of students, all identified as ADHD. The first group received play attention. So they had full integration of that feedback technology, right? We're monitoring their brain state and showing them their attention in real time, integrating that feedback technology with cognitive skill training and behavior shaping. The second group received just cognitive exercises. So what you hear a lot about is brain games on the computer, but no feedback technology and no behavior shaping. And the third was their control. So they received no intervention at all. And at the end of the study, the play attention students were the only students that showed global improvements in all areas, including academic, social, behavioral, and executive function. I found it interesting that at the end of the study, when they sent the blinded observers back into the classroom, they reported back that the play attention students had no behavioral issues. And that's certainly not where we started. Also, what they found is that some of the students were on medication and some of the students were not. And those students who were on medication and in the play attention group had an average decrease in their medication, where the other 2 groups had an average increase. And that goes back to skill building. If we can help our students develop the skills that they lack, then there may be less of a necessity to mask symptoms. Now, I know as educators, you have to have research-based programs. So if any of you want us to send the Tufts University School of Medicine research studies, please just type in Tufts and I'll make certain that you get those studies. There's the pilot study, and then there's the actual study, and then they did a 6-month follow-up as well. So if you want a copy of those studies, just type in Tufts and we'll make certain that you get those studies as well. So they did the pilot at first, and then they showed such great success that the Department of Education actually funded the rest of their study. So really interesting, and I'd be happy to share that information with you. So again, your students, whether they're in elementary school or high school, or if you're teaching at a university level, they're going to be utilizing this body wave technology to control cognitive exercises just with their mind, or more specifically, their attention alone. And the one thing, I know as educators, we know most of our students learn best through experiential learning, right? If we give them hands-on, we give them an experience, they learn from it. Unfortunately, with attention, since we're limited in the tools we have, We're often trying to teach attention through lecture, right? We say, sit still, 1, 2, 3, eyes on me, right? Pay attention. We try to tell them what to do, but that's not really changing behaviors or improving attention. One of the popular 504 accommodations that I came across was, of course, to provide the student with feedback, positive reinforcement when they're paying attention. And that's true. We want them to know when they're paying attention and when they're not, but it's very difficult for us as educators to provide that immediate feedback, right? Because your student may be looking at you and you think they're paying attention, but they're off in the Bahamas somewhere. We can't, as individuals, always know when they're paying attention and when they're not. That's the power of the body wave technology. The body wave technology knows immediately when they're in that attentive state and when they start to drift, whether they're starting to lose their attention because they're daydreaming or fidgeting, or someone walks into the room and they can't filter that noise. Whatever the cause may be, we can immediately indicate to them that they're no longer as attentive. And when we can provide them with constant and immediate feedback regarding their attentive state, that's so empowering, because now we can help them develop the self-regulation and self-monitoring they need in order to not only recognize when they're paying attention, but recognize when they're not paying attention. And more importantly, since we gave them this opportunity, they'll know how to correct it because they've had an opportunity to practice it. So really critical to the learning process, showing them their attentive state in real time. And all of our cognitive exercises, you see them here on the screen, all of the cognitive exercises that we address within your students' program. And they won't need all of these. This is where the customization comes in, where we teach you how to take your students' strengths and weaknesses and actually customize a play attention program for them. But I want you to keep in mind that no matter what area they're working on, whether it's task completion or working memory or auditory processing, no matter what exercise they're involved in, all of these exercises are brain enabled, meaning they have to be paying attention in order to activate the activity. If they're not paying attention, then the activity will stop or the character will go in the wrong direction, and they have to focus back in order to continue. And we do this because we know that the very first catalyst necessary for brain change is attention. You can be a fantastic teacher, which I'm sure all of you are great teachers. However, if that individual, if that student is having a hard time paying attention to you and processing the information, it's going to be very difficult for them to get maximum benefit. So it's critical that we incorporate skill building with our 504 accommodations, or that we incorporate this specific skill building and we can teach you how to take their IEP goals and match that up with a customized play attention program. And no matter what other program you have them engaged in, they may be in a program for dyslexia. You may have a student who is enrolled in a program with an occupational therapist. And all of the work that you do within play attention will simply complement those other programs, because you're getting to the root, right? You're helping them develop all of these cognitive skills they need to strengthen executive function and be successful in the learning process. We also incorporate a full behavior shaping component, because one of the 504 accommodations is to have some behavior support in place. But at the end of the day, we want to teach them what behaviors affect them, how they affect them, and more importantly, over time, show them that they can control these behaviors. So the powerful thing about play attention is that it provides them with a one-to-one correlation on how certain behaviors affect their attention. And then we're going to use that to help them start to learn how to control those behaviors. So let me give you an example. There's one activity called attention stamina, and that's their ability to direct and sustain their attention at will, much like being able to pay attention to the classroom teacher. And they can choose from different characters, but one is a whale, and they'll see that whale going across the screen. Now, once they're focused and paying attention, they're able to push that whale down to the bottom of the ocean just with their mind alone, just their attentive state. No hands required, has nothing to do with where their eyes are, has nothing to do with their breathing, has to do with how attentive they are. If they get distracted, and distraction can be a variety of things. It could be fidgeting, it could be daydreaming, it could be that someone walks into the room and they can't filter that noise. Immediately it will start to float up. Then they have to control that behavior, control that daydreaming, focus back in order to push that character back down. So it works great with our behavior shaping because they get a one-to-one correlation on how that behavior affects them. I'll give you an example of one of my students, one of my favorite students in my second grade classroom, Jaylon, super bright kid, but was really struggling with impulse control and executive function. And he would constantly call out. I'd be teaching math, he'd call out what he did over the weekend. And when I originally asked him, I said, Jaylon, why do you think it's important that you don't call out? And he said, because you tell me not to. So he had no idea how that calling out behavior was affecting him. And you know, and I know that just because it bothered me, that wasn't enough for him to make a change. But in doing play attention, he would be doing that initial exercise and he'd have that character down at the bottom of the ocean. And then he'd call out, I like SpaghettiOs. And immediately that character would float up. And then he'd have to control that and push it back down to the bottom of the ocean. And now he got a one-to-one correlation on how that behavior affected his attention. Not that it just bothered me, but it actually affected him. So I had a real teachable moment. I could say, you know, Jaylon, what happened to that character when you called out? Well, he floated down. So what does that mean? It means I'm not paying attention. So in the classroom, when you do that, what does it mean? It means I'm not paying attention. So now there's this aha moment, right? Now I'm no longer telling him what to do and what not to do. I'm just guiding him through that process. And sheer genius, our artificial intelligence will start developing behavior objectives for him so that he can actually see in graphical form that he can control this. And that's where you're going to see the real changes in behaviors. You know, he'd get back to the classroom and he'd call out, but he'd cover his mouth and he'd look at me like, you're right, I do that. Because a lot of times he was unaware that he was even doing it. But more importantly, over time, he saw that it was something he could control on his own. And you know that there are so many students that feel all of this is outside of their control. So with play attention, you're making them realize that this is all under your control. And that's where you're going to see the behavior changes take place. So really powerful, integrative approach where you as an educator can actually teach cognitive skills that lay the foundation for strong executive function. So let's look at a summary, and please do keep your questions coming because I will go back to our chat box in just a few. But just to summarize what we discussed today, our goal as educators, and I'm sure you have many goals, but our end goal is to make certain that we teach skills that will prepare our students for the real world. We want to remember that strong executive function is critical to school success, that many factors can negatively affect executive function. Accommodations are not enough. We must get to the root cause. We must improve cognitive skills such as attention, processing speed, impulse control, task completion, working memory in order to develop strong executive function. And we can do that within Play Attention. And we can teach you as educators how to develop a very successful Play Attention program for your students. So let's talk about next steps. I know I covered a lot of information. And again, I so appreciate your time and your attention today because I know it's such a busy time for all of you. So next steps, I know many of you have to have a variety of individuals involved in decision making. So if you would like to schedule a specific consultation for you and your colleagues, then please type in consultation and we'll send you our calendars so that you can chat with your colleagues and we can schedule a specific time where we can meet with you and your colleagues and talk about how to develop a really successful Play Attention program for the new school year. So type in consultation and we'll send you out a calendar link. So once you know your schedules, we can schedule that time for you. Also, we do have a specific Play Attention webinar next week on the 30th, and that webinar will go through the educational foundation of Play Attention. It will review some of the information we chatted about today, but it will be more specifically about Play Attention, its educational foundation, and all the different areas we address within our program. If you would like to attend that webinar, please do type in webinar and we'll get you registered. I know that the 30th, many of you will be back at school. It's at 1 p.m. Eastern and you might not be able to attend live, but if you're registered, you will receive the webinar recording. So go ahead and type in consultation if you'd like to schedule a time for a consult with your school, or type in, or just a consult for yourself. It doesn't have to be with any other staff members. It could just be a consultation with you because you have more questions and want more information, or come to our webinar next week. Thank you so much. I will go to the chat box now and address any questions that are there, but I do want to thank you for attending today's presentation. I hope you all have a fantastic school year and reach out to us if we can help you in any way. Thanks so much, everyone. Okay, let's look at other questions that we may have. I don't think we have too many, just a lot of individuals who had questions about or requesting additional information. Christina says, do the students need to speak English in order to use Play Attention? No, the students do not need to speak English. All of the, well, not all of it, but most of the feedback is just visual. So as long as the coach working with that individual can understand English and has gone through the tutorial with their executive function coach and knows how to use the system with their students, it is not necessary for the student to speak English. Good question. BJ wants to know, what is the cost for a classroom set and the individual set? So this is good to go over in a consultation or at the next webinar, because we'll get more in depth into what Play Attention actually involves, because it is a very comprehensive program that you receive. So again, thank you everyone for attending today. It was great speaking with all of you, and I do hope that every single one of you has a fantastic new school year. Take care, and thank you for your time and your attention.